Chapter 8. Dr. Stephen Hanover was known throughout the whole of London, not simply for his skills as a compassionate and gifted animal doctor, but also for his jovial and easy nature. He was a great favorite wherever he went, and had many friends upon whom he could call at any time of the day or night, without hesitation or ceremony. The one feature which was as steadfast in Stephen's appearances as his ready smile was the constant presence of his ever faithful companion, Sir Happy. Sir Happy was equally as well known and recognized on the streets of London as his master, which was of great benefit to us on many occasions when we needed such prominence to work in our favor. Such was the case at the Grayson home. Had Sir Happy not immediately been recognized when he came calling at the residence, we never would have been granted an audience with anyone. Although the Grayson family was away at the time of our arrival, we had the good fortune to be introduced to their favorite family pet, a talkative and unguarded Welsh corgi pup named Percival. He was exceedingly glad to make our acquaintance after having heard so many glowing reports from his family of a certain Stephen Hanover and his faithful companion, Sir Happy. Sir Happy opened the discussion with, "I apologize for the intrusion, but we were under the impression the family had returned from their sabbatical to the country. We had hoped to have an opportunity to interview Sir Grayson himself, seeing as he was a direct witness to the terrible business of his daughter's attack." Percival, or Percy, as he asked us to call him, became very excited. "I was a witness too! I was a witness too! I saw the whole thing through the front gate," he said, tail wagging the entire time. At first I was taken aback by what I perceived to be ill-placed enthusiasm at having witnessed his mistress's attack, but upon further consideration I realized his excitement was attributable to his very young age. My initial estimate placed him at no more than a few months old, and therefore not mature enough to fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. Sir Happy continued, "If you are willing, then, I would like to ask you a few questions. We are investigating several very serious attacks, including your mistress's, and it is our hope to collect as many first-hand accounts of the crimes as we can. First of all, how is Miss Penelope now? I understand it has been several weeks since her attack." Poor Percy transformed immediately into the most miserable creature. His ears drooped and his shoulders sagged as he was reminded of his little girl's suffering. "Poor Penny," Percy moaned. "She has been very sad. She would barely let me touch her for the first few days of her recovery." Percy looked positively dejected as he recalled the emotional distance he had felt from Penny directly following the attack. "She is having her second surgery today to try to fix her legs," he continued, sniffling as he talked. "No infection from the first surgery, so now she's having another skin graft." "Skin graft?" Sir Happy interjected. "Do you mean skin graft?" Percy's ears perked up a bit, and he said, "Oh, perhaps that was it. I was listening through the door, so I wasn't certain. I am sure you are right. You seem very smart." "Please continue, Percy," Sir Happy said. "Tell us about Penny's injuries. You said there was no residual infection or illness as a result of her wounds or the first surgery." "No infections, thanks to Dr. Lister," Percy said with a bit more enthusiasm. "He is some specialist brought in to help in Penny's recovery. He is the best in the kingdom. At least, that is what my master said." It was pleasant to see little Percy's tail wagging as he recited what he knew. Sir Happy looked at me significantly. In a hushed tone, he whispered to me, "Penny is indeed lucky to have such a doctor consulting on her case. Dr. Joseph Lister is considered a premier expert in germ theory and in sterile surgery. He uses carbolic acid to sterilize the wounds as well as the surgical environment. With such a man taking care of her, Penny will make the best recovery medicine can offer. He turned back to our little friend and begged him to continue. Please, tell us about the attack. What do you remember exactly, Percy? Leave nothing out. Even the most insignificant detail can be important in an investigation like this. Once again, little Percy took on the appearance of a wilted and dejected flower, ears down, tail tucked tightly between his legs. He was a most pitiful creature to behold. The memories were obviously painful for him to recall, but his love for his precious Penny gave him a measure of courage to fully recollect the events of that tragic day. Percy closed his eyes as he recounted the day of the attack, either seeking to visualize every element of the scene or endeavoring to block out whatever demons have plagued him since. Whichever the case, I found myself amazed by his attention to detail. I remember I was alone in the garden that day, Percy began. Master and my Penny were out visiting Master's sister. My Penny was so excited. She talked about it all morning. I couldn't go with them because Auntie doesn't like dogs. Percy seemed hurt by the exclusion at first, but very quickly perked up as he looked at us and added, But I knew my Penny would bring me back some sweets. She always brings me sweets when she has to leave me here alone. Sir Happy interrupted. Where was your Penny's mother? Percy wagged his tail and said, Oh, she was out shopping for birthday presents for my Penny, Percy replied. We were planning a big party for her, and all of her friends were invited to come. I love parties. There are always games and treats and laughter and lots of head scratching. Percy suddenly became downhearted again. The party was canceled on account of my Penny's hurts. It was dizzying to me to watch this young pup jump from sorrow to joy, from grieving to celebrating, all within the same narrative. I could not fathom such emotional oscillations, but then again, up to that point in my life, I had never personally witnessed the physical suffering of someone with whom I was close. Little did I know, I would soon find myself facing the same kind of emotional conflict. I am terribly sorry, Percy, Sir Happy said. I know this is very painful to recollect, but I promise you any information you can supply will be most helpful to us. Please continue. Sir Happy offered what reassurance he could to our very sensitive friend. It was almost nighttime because the lamplighters had already begun their work. I heard the sound of Master's carriage on the street, so I ran out to the front gate to greet him and my girl. The gate was closed, so I could only look through the bars and wait for Master and my Penny to come through. Penny must have fallen asleep on the way home because I saw my master step out of the carriage and reach back inside it to carefully lift her out and carry her inside. They were almost to the gate when I heard a growl coming from the outside walk to my right. I tried to see what had made the sound, but our partial brick wall was blocking my view. My Penny's eyelids flittered as though she was waking up, and then it happened. Percy stopped his narrative. We waited a moment, and when he did not continue, I very gently asked, What happened, friend Percy? His eyes filled with such exquisite anguish as he said, almost in a whisper, I couldn't save her. It is a thing of greatest horror for any creature to watch helplessly as their precious loved one is torn apart by a vicious attacker, but it is an impossible burden for a dog to carry because their sole purpose in life is to keep their loved one safe at all costs. Percy, pained eyes looked in my direction. I would have given my life to save her, you know. You would have fought bravely, Sir Percy, said Sir Happy, as he stepped over to our new friend to offer comfort. There was nothing you could do for her, however, and that was the worst part of it all, was it not? All the little corgi could do was nod his head. In a very warm and reassuring voice, Sir Happy said, I know this is the most painful part to recall, Percy, but if you are able, will you finish your narrative? Percy sniffled deeply and continued, Sorry, it is very hard remembering. I still curse how small I am. Soon I'll be bigger, though, and no one will be able to hurt my family when I am around. I will tell you what I saw if it will help you capture my Penny's attacker. It all happened so quickly. The attack, I mean. The giant beast of a dog jumped on my master, knocking him to the ground. At the same time, he grabbed my Penny by the leg and dragged her some distance away. It was strange, really. At first, the big dog just stood over her, sniffing her like some giant hound sniffing down a rabbit hole. And then he attacked. He flipped her around by the leg like she was a rag doll. Master got his feet back under him and ran over to where the beast was. He pounded his fists on its back and kicked its side. I've never heard Master scream like that before. He was a wild man trying to save my Penny. At first, it seemed as though the blows had no effect on the beast, as if Master were wailing against a great rock instead of a creature made of flesh and blood. Finally, however, it released its hold on my Penny's leg and began to focus on Master. It was then that my ears began to hurt. I closed my eyes against the pain because it was so bad, and then it stopped. When I opened my eyes, the beast was gone. Master ran into the house, carrying my poor Penny's bloody body. He sent for the doctor, who immediately said she should be taken to the hospital. The rest, you know. You have been very brave to tell us all you have, Percy. Sir Happy smiled warmly at him. Do you know if the clothes Penny and her father were wearing are still in the house? Percy perked up, excited he might be of further help. If they have not been burned already, we may still find them downstairs next to the furnace. He eagerly led the way downstairs into the furnace room. There, in a pile, lay the bloody clothes. Sir Happy walked forward and gingerly began to examine each piece. Percy leaned over and whispered to me, What is he looking for? I replied as softly as I could, Clues. We both waited anxiously as Sir Happy lifted each item from the pile. I saw his hackles go up ever so slightly, much the same as they had at Lexington Port. I held my breath, afraid to move, for fear of interrupting my friend in his work. He turned and gave me a look of deep certainty. I knew at that moment we had found our killer once again. I believe, Mr. Marmee, we have all we need for now, Sir Happy said. Thank you for all your help, Percy. You have been a most accommodating host, and we thank you for it. I hope we may once again call upon you, but under less disturbing circumstances. Percy seemed delighted at the idea of our paying him another visit in the future, and said we could come at any time. I know my Penny would love to meet you both. With one final adieu, we were back on our way to Hanover Place to contemplate the results of our efforts. After a few short days, Sir Happy and I found ourselves returning to the Grayson home on less official business, accompanied by Dr. Stephen Hanover and a delightful basket of Amelia's famous sweetmeats and some smoked kipper snacks. Since Stephen was a personal friend of Mr. Grayson, it seemed appropriate for all of us to inquire after the health of Percy's little Penny. We were warmly received by everyone in the home, I believe in part because of my thoughtful addition of the kipper snacks, and we spent several happy hours visiting with the family and enjoying the basket of treats. It was very moving to meet Penny herself, putting at last a face to what had initially been a faceless victim. Considering what the poor child had been through, she was most willing to make our acquaintance, especially that of Sir Happy. I would have thought the harrowing events of her attack would have made her leery of meeting a strange dog like Sir Happy, but she was as open to the introduction as any child with a gentle nature can be. Sir Happy, for his part, could not resist the girl, especially once she began scratching him behind the ears. He melted into her lap like a silken scarf and barely moved for the rest of the time we were there. I had some concerns when it came time for us to leave that it would take a great effort on our part to pry him from his perch. Thankfully, little action was necessary when the moment of departure arrived. He did, however, maintain a rather dreamy expression upon his face when we got into our carriage, an expression which graced his visage long after we arrived home. When we returned to Hanover Place, I was anxious to find out whether Sir Happy's perspective had changed in the matter of the Grayson attack, having met the family and the rest of the involved parties face to face. For myself, I found I was more resolute in finding the killer, and when I posed the question to my friend, I discovered he had a similar determination. We must find the fiend responsible for these crimes, Mommy, Sir Happy declared. Not just for the sake of justice, but to offer these families some peace of mind. Just think what it must be like for the victims wondering where the creature is now. I, for one, believe the sweet girl Penny has experienced enough traumas without living with the fear the beast will return to finish the job. Although I echoed his sentiments completely, I could not help but tease him for his dreamlike devotion to the girl. You are quite right, Sir Happy, I replied, with as serious a tone as I could manage. We should put our best efforts into finding the creature responsible for all this suffering. I feel certain when we do find the beast and bring him to justice, you will be showered with unlimited ear-scratching from dear Penny herself. A reward I am certain you will accept without protest, I said with a mischievous grin on my face. That being the case, then, I shall not share a single one with you, Mr. Tittles, Sir Happy shot back. Since Sir Happy only called me by my sweet Annie's pet name when he meant to truly vex me, I did the only mature thing to do in cases like this. I stuck my tongue out at him and walked out of the room. The morrow would bring activity enough for us both, but for now, my comfort would be in the soft cushion of my bed and thoughts of my sweet Annie. Chapter 9. The morning brought with it a renewed sense of vigor toward our investigation. Meeting the Grayson family the night before was just the sort of spark Sir Happy and I needed to light a fire within us. The seemingly innocuous social call took all of the cold, hard facts and gave them depth and warmth, adding a flavor of compassion which could not be found within the pages of a police report or written within the statement accounts of an eyewitness. As I ate my scrambled eggs, crumpets, and sweet cream, I felt as though the work Sir Happy and I were doing was truly important. I was ready to go wherever our investigation might lead us, just as soon as I was finished with my morning salmon, cake, and tea. Our initial discussion with Percy, as well as the visit to Lexington Court, had presented us with some very interesting clues. One thing we knew for certain, the scent from Lexington Court, identified as possibly belonging to the killer, and the scent detected on Penny's clothes were one in the same. We need more information, Mommy, Sir Happy announced during breakfast. We now know Penny's attacker and the one who murdered Mr. McGibbons is very likely the same individual, and there are other victims to consider besides these two. We must find the connections which link them all together. What if there is no connection? I offered cheerfully. What if these attacks were committed at random? Such random behavior would constitute a madman. It may be why the Yard has not found the culprit yet. Madmen very rarely behave in a logical, predictable manner. Sir Happy laughed. Ha 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 ha! You have a lot to learn about investigating crime, old chap. First of all, madmen, if I might borrow from the common vernacular, are very rarely truly mad in the classical sense. They are merely misunderstood and are therefore labeled insane by those who do not wish to peel away the outer layers of their actions to view the truly dark core beneath. I certainly have no desire to myself, so who am I to judge? Secondly, although I mean no disrespect to the intelligence of the Yard, I must say there are a great many things the inspectors of the Yard miss when investigating a crime. For example, who in the Yard thought to interview our friend Percy? He was a witness to the entire ordeal, yet not a single soul asked him to recount what he saw. I am convinced there is more to learn from each attack beyond what was logged in the official case files. Remember, Mommy, most humans do not understand our language, which incidentally limits what details they are able to collect, and many of the inspectors wouldn't trouble themselves to listen if they could communicate with us. We are not equals in their minds, and therefore we are marginalized and overlooked as though we were part of the landscape itself, more decoration than anything else, like a rug or a lampstand. I shook my head in disagreement. You think rather meanly about our human friends. On the contrary, Mommy, I may give some people too much credit at times, Sir Happy replied. You see, my friend, the relationship we have with our beloved humans is very special. They understand us because they love us and because they believe we have something to say. Our true friends see beyond our form. When they look at us, they see friends with thoughts and feelings, with dreams and ideas, just waiting to be shared. Not every animal can claim the same kind of relationship with their humans. We are blessed, Mommy, to be loved and understood the way we are. Sir Happy was correct in both regards. We were not viewed as equals by most people, and we were blessed to be loved the way we were. I thought about my own sweet Annie and the times when we seemed to communicate without any words at all. I knew her every mood and every nuance, which made her lovably unique, and she knew everything there was to know about me. At times it seemed quite magical to be with her, and there was no place in the world I would rather be than right there by her side. I also knew there were so many other animals who would never know that kind of magic in their own lives. It was the most unfortunate truth I was ever forced to accept. Well then, I said finally, I guess we have no other option but to continue in our investigative efforts and visit the next victim on our list. I believe the name was Niall Peterson, and if memory serves me, he was on his way to Eton College when his attack occurred. I always knew when Sir Happy was contemplating something extremely important, because his brow would crinkle up and his eyes would become intensely focused, as though he was concentrating on some object invisible to everyone but him. At the moment I mentioned Mr. Peterson, Sir Happy's brow was so wrinkled he resembled a bloodhound pup which had yet to grow into its excess skin. No, Mr. Mommy, he said with a far-away gaze, I believe we should take another look at Mr. McGibbon's case. He looked over at me very intently. "Tell me, Mommy, what is different about McGibbons compared to the other victims?" "Well, he was the only one who was murdered," I replied. "Exactly," he shouted. "None of the others died as a result of their wounds. So the question we must ask ourselves, and the question we must answer first, is why? Why was he the first to die? Why not Penny or Mr. Peterson or any of the other victims on our list? Perhaps there is more to the McGibbons murder than we first anticipated." The question reverberated in my brain. Why was McGibbons the first? What made him different from the rest? On the surface, the answer might be to assume the killing was simply the escalation of violence, as had been evident when reviewing the timeline and details of the other attacks. It was a convenient theory, and one which made perfect sense upon first glance. But beneath this theory was a world of possibilities, possibilities which would eventually lead us to the doorstep of our killer. Returning to the McGibbons murder meant we had to dig deeper into the man's life and his activities beyond just the day he was murdered. We had to find out what he might have been involved in, which could have cost him his life. It meant we had to find people who were willing to talk to us about a person who turned out to be very unpopular with the locals. Sir Happy and I had our work cut out for us before we stuck the first paw out the front door. I have learned through my years of adventure with Sir Happy, investigation is a very complicated process which extends far beyond any crime scene or assortment of clues. There is always more to a mystery and its unraveling than just the physical details. There is also an unseen dynamic to the people and events surrounding the mystery. The social pressures and class separation that exist within any community or society tend to provide unanticipated challenges to even a seasoned detective. It comes down to this. Collecting evidence is the easy part. Sorting through the complexities of the human dynamic, especially within London's underbelly, and finding witnesses who are willing to speak about an incident is incredibly hard. Since my sweet Annie and I had spent so much of my early life working with the poor, volunteering at the local soup kitchen, and offering our services when our church passed out clothing to the needy, I assumed Sir Happy's and my efforts to hunt down a murderer would be welcomed or at least appreciated by the people who seemed most at risk of being attacked. That is to say, the street vendors and merchants whose position in life most closely seemed to match Mr. Jessup McGibbons. My assumption, however, was an erroneous one, as our inquiries were met with great resistance, if not outright hostility, when the name of Jessup McGibbons was mentioned. As I said, he was extremely disliked during his lifetime, and as unfortunate as it is to say, his death was almost celebrated. Were it not for the fact that several of the merchant families had suffered attacks from the same canine assailant, we may not have received any worthwhile information at all. We were able to discover through our initial inquiries of the locals of Lexington Court that Mr. McGibbons was indeed a peddler of goods. From what we could gather, he hawked a little bit of everything, from fruits to meats to firewood to old rags, which greatly infuriated the established costermongers or vendor families in the area, who greatly resented the unwelcome competition. For those listeners who are unfamiliar with the costermongers and their way of life, I will endeavor to explain what I mean and the significance of it all. Often referred to simply as costers, costermongers are street peddlers who are typically categorized according to the wares they sell. For example, there are fruit costers, meat costers, houseware costers, and so on, who only sell fruit or meat or housewares, respectively speaking. Costermongering is usually a family business, passed down from generation to generation, with Coster families only intermarrying with other Coster families. The secrets of the Coster trade are closely guarded and are protected with tremendous ferocity. It is a closed society with little admittance of anyone or anything considered an outsider. Jessup McGibbons was as much of an unwelcome outsider as it got. He had no respect for the Coster way of life. He had no respect for the Coster families, and he did everything he could to assault and offend the Costers at every turn. He cheated them, he stole from them, and he did a great many other things which frankly do not merit repeating. McGibbons, as it turned out, was a reprehensible sort of man on a good day, which made our work with this close-mouthed society even more challenging. Costers resented the law or anything resembling it, which unfortunately for Sir Happy and me meant our investigation. Coster communities preferred instead to dispense justice within their own closed societies. The only thing they resented more than the law was anyone who was perceived as encroaching upon their territory. Jessup McGibbons fell into this undesired category of usurper. He was not a Coster, yet he peddled merchandise within established Coster territory, which made the Coster community very angry with him. Beyond this acknowledgement, none of the individuals we interviewed were willing to say anything more about the matter, and not a soul admitted being a witness to the crime. "This is infuriating, Sir Happy," I said to my friend after reaching another dead end. "I can understand their reluctance to speak on the matter, but they cannot possibly expect us to believe no one was present during the deadly attack of Mr. Jessup McGibbons. His hour of death occurred at a time when many of the Costers would have been closing shop and either on their way home or on their way to the evening markets where they buy their wares at wholesale. The time of day would have unwarranted the presence of at least one witness, would have warranted the presence of at least one witness, certainly. I cannot believe how closed-mouthed they are." I felt very indignant about the whole experience. Apparently, my exasperation was not shared with my friend, as he seemed calm and undisturbed by our apparent lack of success. "You must understand, Mommy," Sir Happy said in an even tone of voice. "These people have been a tight-knit community for centuries. Their removal from the outside world was necessary for their survival as a whole. They have spent years being terribly mistreated by society at large, including being harassed by the law, and because of that, they trust no one outside their community. I cannot say as I blame them for it. It is simply who they are. What we must do is show them we can be trusted. It is the only way to open their hearts and their mouths to us. Have a little patience, my friend. Trust me when I say we are far better received than Inspector Farley would be." "Well, how do you propose we earn their trust, since they are inclined to judge us negatively before we even open our mouths?" I asked. "I mean, we are, after all, investigating the murder of someone whom they hated with a deep passion. Their silence could indicate they have a great deal to hide. Frankly speaking, had you not connected the murder with the other attacks, I would be inclined to think these Costers had done the killing themselves as retribution against McGibbons for infringing upon their territory. It is a perfect way to send a strong message to others who might contemplate the same move." Sir Happy was not amused with my statement, and very curtly said, "That is precisely the attitude which lost the Coster trust to begin with. Think on this, my friend. You greatly dislike, perhaps even despise, Mrs. Eula McGibbons because she was the cause of yours and Annie's separation. If something dreadful were to happen to her, would it be fair of me to accuse you before looking elsewhere for an explanation?" "No, of course not," I retorted. then do not jump to conclusions which are equally unwarranted in the matter of the Costers, Sir Happy said, just because they are different from you and perhaps a little hard to understand. I felt ashamed at myself because I realized at that moment my heart was not where it needed to be. Sir Happy was right. What right did I have to judge these people? What made them more suspect than any other group? Was it their poverty? Was it their manners? Was it the way of dress or their way of life? I had always thought of myself as a noble creature with a giving and open heart, and yet at the very moment when I was afforded the opportunity to extend my generosity to this eccentric group, I failed. I let prejudice lead my heart instead of open-mindedness. I began to feel perhaps I was not so noble after all. You have shamed me, Sir Happy, I began. My friend immediately jumped to my defense with, it was certainly not my intention. I was merely pointing out. I broke in before he could finish. I know where your heart was. The problem is my heart was operating from a prejudicial standpoint. I never gave these people a chance, and I'm ashamed at myself for it. I always envisioned myself in a noble light, generous, open, gracious, even good were all terms I had at one time or another associated with myself. This moment has proven to me I am not nearly as good as I believed myself to be. I am just as base and as low as the very people who engendered the Coster distrust in the first place. I have no business even asking these people to trust me now. I am not worthy of it. I will not accept the label you have just given yourself, Marmee, Sir Happy replied. Yes, perhaps your heart's approach was not what it should be. You might have started from a less prejudicial standpoint where the Costers are concerned. I will grant you that. The real truth of who you are, though, is based on what you do with your self-discovery. When I find I have fallen short of the mark I have set for myself, I look for ways to change. No one is perfect, old chap, but it is what we do with our fallibility which makes the difference in who we are or who we become. You need not be defined by a moment of hasty judgment. If you see the need for change within your own heart, and in fact make change for the better, then you have won a tremendous battle in this world. The difference between a good man and a bigot, Marmee, is that the good man acknowledges the error in his views or beliefs and seeks to correct it in an active manner. A bigot embraces his misjudgments as though they are without error. I believe you are a good man and a gentleman to boot. You are frustrated and anxious for this case to be solved, and it showed through in your statement. My good opinion of you has not changed. In fact, your willingness to feel shame at yourself for what you felt and for what you said simply strengthens my opinion of your goodness. I did not feel better by his assertions of my goodness. In fact, they almost worked to make me feel more ashamed at having so openly exposed my shortcomings. I would rather have been a gambler or a drunkard than to be someone whose hasty judgment could wound another. I decided I would endeavor never again to allow myself to judge another soul on their social or ethnic grouping, or even upon their initial response to me as a person. I would reserve my judgment until I knew an individual's proven character, and once that character was established, I resolved to never assign the same character, good or bad, to the group to which they belonged. It was only after making this personal resolution that I found any measure of peace about my behavior. With this powerful self-realization, my patience was rehabilitated, and I had a renewed commitment to give the Coster community a chance. It was with this transformation newly before me that I suggested to Sir Happy we try again. Acknowledging the language differences between man and beast, we sought out the animals closest to the Coster families to speak with them. It was through several conversations of this sort we received our initial glimpse of Jessup McGibbons. However, the Coster mentality extended to their animals as well, and it was through the animals we hit our implacable dead end. It was during a moment of regrouping on our part when I noticed a certain scruffy-looking cat watching us. He was nearly hidden beneath one of the fruit carts we had just passed, but I could see him peek out between the spokes of the wheel closest to us. He was a black and brown tabby who seemed unaccustomed to what I had always believed was a habitual feline grooming process. His eyes were bright enough, but he was thin, as though it had been a while since he had a truly filling meal. I nonchalantly pointed him out to Sir Happy, who skillfully looked without appearing to do so. "Perhaps this is our chance," I offered, feeling eager to demonstrate my new resolve. I was expecting my friend to suggest we both go over to make this new acquaintance, but I found myself very surprised when he suggested I talk to the chap on my own. "It makes all the sense in the world, Marmee," he said quite logically. "I am a dog, and he might find my initial presence somewhat of a threat. You, on the other hand, will not be seen as such, and can therefore make an opening for dialogue and introduce me as a friend." I knew Sir Happy was offering me a chance to redeem myself, not so much in his eyes, but in my own. I wasted no time in walking over to introduce myself. The peering feline's name was Mr. Snuffles, and he belonged to the family under whose cart he was taking refuge. I very quickly established to the young fellow Sir Happy as a friend to all felines, and it was quite safe to talk within his presence. Although he seemed skeptical at first, he allowed me to wave Sir Happy over to the fruit cart, and within a very short period of time we found ourselves becoming better acquainted. I am always curious about the names some people bestow upon their pets, being myself the loving victim of my own sweet Annie's whimsical naming skills. I have made it a point, however, regardless of the intensity of my own curiosity, never to ask how it was that an individual's name came to be. I myself have no explanation for the Tiddlewinks portion of my name. It was not a game my sweet Annie was particularly fond of, I will say, however. It was not long before the mystery of Mr. Snuffles' name was revealed through my observation of the young lad. I have noted throughout my extensive studies of politics and negotiation, it is often customary to make a peace offering to the opposing side. Not wanting to break with centuries-old tradition, and seeing as how the poor thing was starving nearly to death, I offered our new friend one of the smoked kipper snacks I had upon my person. I was not particularly hungry myself, and I thought the meal, although small, would do this slender cat some good. Believing smoked kipper to be the universal sign of friendship, I was a little taken aback when Mr. Snuffles narrowed his eyes and sniffed suspiciously at the fish, saying, "What's that for?" Not wanting to seem rude or at all mistrusting myself, I responded, "It is a smoked kipper snack, my friend, and it is for you to eat. There is no other motive behind my offering it, I assure you. Here, if you are concerned that I offer the fish because it is somehow contaminated, I shall eat a bit myself to show it is fresh." I broke off a piece and without ceremony tossed it down with a hearty smack. Mr. Snuffles needed no other testimony to its goodness and immediately grabbed a piece and swallowed it down. "Thank you kindly, sir. It ain't every day that someone offers a bloke something without expecting something back." I could see the tense knot between his shoulders loosen a bit as he said it, indicating a little bit of trust was established with my small offering of food. Nothing to it, Mr. Snuffles. It is always nice to make a connection with your fellow creatures, I said cheerfully. There is nothing which speaks friendship quite like a shared bit of smoked kipper. This brings me to another reason for our intruding upon your early morning vigil. My friend Sir Happy and I are in need of a little help from you, if you are able, I said, indicating in the direction of my silent partner. Before I could get another word out, Mr. Snuffles made a loud snuffle and exclaimed, I knew it! His shoulders immediately knotted back up, all trust flying out the window. No one ever does nothing for no reason. Snuffle. I was afraid he was going to run away with this last statement, but fortunately he remained where he was. You misunderstand me, sir, I said quickly, attempting to mend the rift I was afraid I had just created. I can assure you, Mr. Snuffles, I did not intend to offend you. I would sooner walk away now without asking for your help than to stay and have you believe I offered friendship and sought favors at a price. We will leave you to your watch. I was indicating to Sir Happy we should walk away, but before we could take a step, we were stopped by our nervous, snuffling comrade.